Welcome to a new deep dive. Today we're tackling a name you see, well, pretty much everywhere. A figure who really shapes the landscape of tech, business, even how we think about the future. Elon Musk.
That's right. And we've got quite a stack of source material here, excerpts, articles, notes, basically tracing this really remarkable journey. Starts right from his birth in South Africa, goes all the way through, space, cars, AI, internet, social media, the whole lot.
It really is a narrative just packed with intense ambition, some staggering setbacks, moments where everything nearly collapsed, and these dramatic, often, let's be honest, controversial turns. So our mission today in this deep dive is to unpack every single detail we have in these sources, understand the context behind all these different sprawling projects, and really dig into the questions this material raises about his impact, which is undeniably profound.
Exactly. We'll follow the threads the sources give us, look at the motivations, the challenges he bumped up against, the specifics of the wins, and yeah, the failures too, and the controversies, which definitely seem to follow him around. We're tracking that path from like this solitary kid obsessed with books to the leader commanding these multiple world-altering companies.
Let's settle in. Let's really unpack this incredible story piece by piece, sticking right to what these sources tell us. Let's get into those details.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start exactly where these sources begin his story. His birth, June 28, 1971, Pretoria, South Africa. And, right from the get-go, the description of his childhood, it sets a really complex stage, maybe even a bit of a challenging one.
Yeah, the material paints this picture of contradictions, really. There was definite material wealth in the background, right? But that seems to sit alongside this profound sense of isolation for him as a kid. Clearly highly intelligent, maybe even extraordinarily so. But that intelligence seemed, paired with this deep feeling of alienation from his peers, from his environment, just not quite fitting in.
The sources mention his parents, Mae Musk, who we know now as a Canadian dietitian and model, and Errol Musk, an engineer, and their divorce when Elon was 9. I mean, that happens, but it feels significant given what came next.
It does, and the sources really focus on where he lived after that, which was mostly with his father. And they include this specific, pretty impactful detail here. Elon's later description of his father, quoted directly in the material as, "A terrible human being."
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not just like a casual remark. It's presented as this really key insight into what sounds like a deeply difficult relationship, something that seems to have left a real mark.
And school, according to this material, well, it sounds like it offered very little comfort. He was severely bullied. The sources don't just say bullied. They actually detail this specific incident when he was only 12. Beaten so badly, he needed to be hospitalized.
That's rough.
Yeah, it's a really stark detail. It just highlights how intense those struggles were for him.
It really underscores that theme you see early on, this difficulty with, physical stuff, social integration. The material explicitly notes he wasn't athletic, didn't have strong social connections in those school years. He wasn't finding his place in the usual ways kids do.
So with that kind of difficulty, where did he turn? The sources are absolutely crystal clear on this. Books. Books became his entire world. Not just a hobby, they describe it almost as an obsession, central to his life back then.
And the types of books are incredibly telling, aren't they? It basically lays the groundwork for his entire future. The sources list specific things. Isaac Asimov's huge Foundation series.
A classic.
Definitely. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is interesting, that mix of sci-fi and humor.
Right, the philosophical depth in there too.
Exactly. Science fiction more broadly, obviously. And then themes that would just dominate his life later on AI, space travel, those big existential questions about where humanity's headed. You can literally see the blueprints for SpaceX, Neuralink, his AI concerns forming right there in what he was reading as a kid.
But it wasn't just, soaking it all in passively. The sources also highlight this early knack for tech. It showed up really quickly. He taught himself programming at age 10.
Yeah, age 10, which back then was definitely not common, not like today.
Not at all. And this technical skill then combined with this entrepreneurial spark, like remarkably early. By 12, he creates and sells a video game he made called Blaster. Sold it to a magazine for $500.
$500. Okay, might not sound like a fortune now, but the sources frame this as a really significant first taste of entrepreneurship for a kid in, 1983. It shows both the technical chops and that drive to actually, make something and sell it.
The sources make this really powerful connection, linking these early details to the bigger picture, saying, look, even as this bullied, isolated kid lost in these sci-fi futures, he wasn't just dreaming about it. He was already trying to build it, selling code, making things.
That drive to build,
The
yeah.
drive to build, not just imagine, gets established really early. And it just becomes this defining theme throughout everything else.
Absolutely. And that drive, that energy, it propelled him towards the next huge step, the sources detail, moving to North America. He makes that leap in 1989. He's 17.
And the reasons for leaving South Africa then, they're highlighted pretty clearly. Sure, seeking opportunity was part of it, but a big stated reason was partly to avoid the mandatory military service, which was required under the apartheid regime at the time.
Right, that adds a crucial layer of context, doesn't it? Historical, political. It wasn't just about personal ambition.
Exactly. So he gets to North America. The sources trace his academic path. First, he enrolls at Queen's University in Canada, gets residency there, then transfers to the University of Pennsylvania in the U.S., looking for, bigger opportunities maybe, perhaps drawn by that early tech scene starting to bubble up.
And at Penn, he goes for this dual degree setup, gets bachelor's degrees in both physics and economics. The sources kind of frame this combination as pretty significant. You've got the hard science, understanding the basic laws of how things work, and then the principles of markets, business, incentives. It feels like a foundation that really shaped how he approached problems later on, that sort of interdisciplinary thinking.
The sources even give us some insights into what he was like back then, through recollections from his roommates at Penn. They describe someone who wasn't yet, Elon Musk the brand, this global figure we see now. But the core interests, the huge ambitions, they were definitely there. You could see them.
Oh, yeah. Like what specifically?
Well, specific anecdotes cited in the sources. They paint a pretty vivid picture. Roommates recalling his dorm walls weren't covered in, band posters or whatever. They were covered in pictures of space.
Okay, checks out.
Right. They remember him being completely obsessed with the future of energy decades before Tesla or Solar City were even ideas. And crucially, they recall him stating, explicitly, his plan wasn't just about making money. His goal, even then, according to these sources, was to change the world.
Wow. So that idealistic, almost messianic kind of ambition was there really early on.
Seems like it. Which makes his next academic move, detailed in the sources, even more surprising. He applies to Stanford for a PhD program in applied physics, a super prestigious program, and he gets in.
Okay, Stanford PhD sounds like the logical next step.
You'd think. But then comes the twist. He drops out after just 2 days.
2 days, not 2 months.
Nope. 2 days. It's a detail that just screams, impulsive, urgent, seizing the moment when he saw it.
So what was the reason? Why ditch Stanford so fast?
The explicit reason, given in the sources, the internet, it was just exploding. He saw this massive potential, and he felt, according to the material, that spending years on a PhD, he just missed the boat, missed this huge wave that was building in the digital world.
Right. That sense of urgency again, didn't want to miss out. Highlights that intense focus on spotting transformative trends and just jumping in, even if it meant ditching the conventional path.
And that laser focus immediately pivots him into his first major startup venture, which the sources cover in detail, Zip2.
Okay, Zip2. Founded in 1995, right after the Stanford non-start, the sources mention the co-founders, Elon, his brother Kimball Musk, and a small team who kind of bought into this idea of getting businesses online.
And what Zip2 actually did, the sources describe it as basically an online business directory and mapping service, specifically designed for newspapers to use on their early websites. They give this helpful analogy. Think early digital Yellow Pages meets MapQuest.
Got it. Find a business, get directions online. Simple now, but probably pre-novel then.
Exactly. And those early days of Zip2 sound anything but glamorous, according to the sources. They paint that classic startup picture. Sleeping in the office, showering at the local YMCA, pouring every cent back into the company.
The ramen noodle diet phase.
Pretty much. And Elon's personal role during that intense period gets highlighted. Apparently coding late into the night, fueled by caffeine and just sheer ambition, shows that extreme work ethic starting early.
And did it pay off?
It did, eventually. Big exit event. The sources detail that in 1999, Compaq, remember Compaq Computers?
Oh, yeah. Big name back then.
They acquired Zip2 for $307 million, mostly cash, some stock.
Wow, okay, that's a serious exit for a first venture. And for Elon, personally.
Sources specify his take, $22 million at age 27. So, yeah, his first real taste of significant wealth from building and selling something.
I sense a but coming.
There is a but. The sources really underscore that this success came with major frustration for Elon. Despite being a founder, the driving force, the company's investors, the board, They'd reportedly forced him out of key leadership roles, particularly CEO, before the sale happened.
Ah, okay, so he didn't get to steer the ship all the way.
Exactly. And the sources dig into how he felt about it. Basically, he felt they didn't trust his vision for where the company should go. And they quote this really powerful resolve he formed from that experience, a line that seems to echo through everything he did next. That wouldn't happen again.
Ooh. Okay, so that experience of losing control, it really stuck with him, became a core driver.
Seems that way. And that resolve, that determination, it immediately shapes the next venture. The sources say after Zip 2, he wanted to do something really big, something more fundamental, more impactful than just, maps for newspapers.
So what was the bigger target?
Money itself. The sources say he targeted money. He envisioned using the internet to completely revolutionize banking, money transfers, the whole antiquated system.
Okay, that's ambitious, which led to...
X.com. Founded in 1999. And the core idea behind X.com, the sources describe it as totally revolutionary, even wild at the time, because it was conceived as a fully online bank.
An online bank in 99? Yeah, that does sound pretty out there. What did it actually offer?
The sources list these features that were groundbreaking then. Open an account completely online, send money to anyone just using their email address. No branches, no paperwork, just a pure digital-first approach to finance. Almost unheard of back then.
But I bet it wasn't smooth sailing.
Definitely not. The sources detail the challenges under his leadership. They describe his time as CEO as, well, this mix of bold vision and, frankly, a lot of internal chaos. He's painted as this demanding, restless leader, pushing hard but maybe creating instability too.
What kind of problems cropped up?
Specific issues mentioned? The engineering team was struggling to keep up, fix bugs. And the investors, they were getting nervous, worried about the direction, the stability under his leadership.
So shades of Zip 2 again.
A little bit. And it culminated in this major event detailed in the sources. X.com merged with a competitor in 2000. The competitor was a company called Confinity. And Confinity had developed this popular online payment tool called PayPal.
Ah, okay, so that's where PayPal comes in, the merger.
Exactly. But bringing these two different companies, different visions, different cultures together, almost immediately, the sources say, a power struggle kicked off between the leaders of the two merged sides about the direction, who was really in charge.
And let me guess, it didn't end well for Elon.
Familiar story, unfortunately. The sources detail his second ousting from a company he started, late 2000. And specifically, while he was away on vacation, the board of the merged company voted him out as CEO, replaced him. The sources make a point of saying, ousted again.
Ouch! While on vacation, too. That's cold.
Right. But despite being removed as CEO again, the sources note he was still the largest shareholder in the combined company, which by then had pretty much adopted the PayPal name and focus.
Okay. So still a big piece of the pie.
A very big piece. And it proved incredibly valuable because of the massive exit that followed. PayPal gets sold to eBay in 2002 for $1.5 billion.
Billion with a B. Okay. And Elon's payout from that?
The sources specify $180 million net after taxes.
Wow. Okay. $180 million. That's game-changing money.
Totally. So the sources kind of summarize where he is at this point. He's got serious capital. He's got invaluable, if sometimes painful, experience from two startups, huge success, but also the frustration of losing control twice. And he's definitely got something left to prove. That resolve about not letting it happen again must have been burning even brighter after PayPal.
You'd think so. So $180 million burning a hole in his pocket. What does he do next? This is where it gets really wild, right?
This is where it goes interstellar, literally. The sources detail that in 2002, right off the back of the PayPal sale, Elon Musk launches this ambition that just sounded completely nuts to most people at the time.
Yeah.
Make humanity a multiplanetary species.
Right. Just a casual goal.
Exactly. And this leads to founding Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, better known, obviously, as SpaceX. And the core idea, the sources explain, was incredibly disruptive. Slash the cost of space travel dramatically, make getting to orbit and eventually beyond way, way cheaper than the established government way.
And the sources emphasize just how, well, insane isn't too strong a word for how that sounded back then, right? Space was NASA, Roscosmos, huge aerospace contractors, not some tech guy who just sold a payments company.
Totally. The skepticism was immense, but the sources consistently highlight Musk was just completely undeterred, didn't care what people thought was possible.
How how did he approach it differently? Not like Boeing or Lockheed, presumably.
Not at all. The sources describe him pulling together this team of, quote, scrappy engineers, setting up shop in a warehouse in Hawthorne, California. Not exactly Cape Canaveral.
Mm-hmm. And their whole philosophy, the source's detail, was driven by that desire for control we talked about, right? Stemming from Zip2 and PayPal. They aimed to build almost everything themselves, in-house, from scratch.
Engines, rocket bodies, software, the works. The sources explicitly say minimal outsourcing, few contractors, just obsessive control over design, manufacturing, everything. His way of making sure the vision, the execution stayed his. Nowhere getting pushed out.
But taking on rocket science from scratch, that can't have been easy. Were there immediate successes?
Far from it. The sources detail some really significant early setbacks. Their first rocket, the Falcon 1, designed for small satellite launches, the first 3 attempts to get it to orbit, all failed. Blew up, basically.
This period stretches into 2008.
3 failures in a row. That must have been brutal. Financially, emotionally.
Absolutely. That third failure in 2008 especially is described in the sources as pushing SpaceX right to the brink of collapse. They'd burned through almost all their cash. According to the material, they literally had just enough money left for one last try.
Wow. Everything riding on that 4th launch.
Everything. But that 4th attempt? It was the breakthrough. The sources pinpoint the date, September 28, 2008. Falcon 1 successfully reaches orbit.
Finally, they did it. They did it. And the historical significance gets highlighted. First, privately funded, liquid-fueled rocket ever to reach orbit. It proved this new, cheaper model for space access wasn't just a dream. It was possible.
And that technical win must have opened some doors.
Huge doors. Almost immediately, this business lifeline arrives that the sources explicitly say saved the company. Just weeks after that successful launch, NASA awards SpaceX this massive $1.6 billion contract for cargo resupply missions to the International Space Station.
Wow, talk about timing.
Incredible timing. That contract gave them the cash, the credibility they desperately needed right then. The sources emphasize Elon's huge gamble on space had worked against insane odds. But they also make it clear this was really just the beginning for SpaceX.
Now here's where the story gets even crazier, intensity-wise. Because while SpaceX is having these near-death experiences trying to get Falcon 1 off the ground, the sources reveal Musk is also simultaneously deeply involved in backing a totally different revolutionary company.
Right, not just one moonshot at a time.
Right. Apparently not. He's backing this electric car startup called Tesla Motors.
And it's important to note, as the sources do, Tesla wasn't actually founded by Musk initially. The material identifies the original founders as engineers Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning.
Okay, so he came in later.
Relatively early, yeah. 2004, the sources detail his first investment, $6.5 million, and he becomes chairman of the board. So significant influence right from early on.
But knowing the pattern, I'm guessing it wasn't all smooth sailing between him and the founders.
The sources describe growing creative tensions. His vision, his demanding style, started clashing with the original leadership.
So he starts pushing for changes.
Yep. By 2007, the sources detail he's actively pushing for big shifts in management.
And eventually,
he takes over as CEO. In 2008, and just pause on that timing again, the sources make a point of this, 2008. The exact same critical year, SpaceX is down to its last dollar, facing those make-or-break launches. He's now CEO of 2 companies, both seemingly teetering on the absolute edge of bankruptcy.
That's almost unbelievable pressure. How did he even function?
Hard to imagine. And his stated mission for Tesla, quoted in the sources, was typically huge, broad. Accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Again, framing it as way bigger than just cars. Fundamental change.
But like SpaceX, did Tesla have early struggles under his leadership?
Oh yeah, big time. The sources describe the initial phase with him as CEO as, well, nearly a disaster.
What went on?
Their first car, the Roadster. The sources say it was plagued with problems. Major production delays, huge cost overruns compared to what they'd planned, and just widespread skepticism, even ridicule from the established auto industry and a lot of the public. Expensive toy, things like that.
So the money situation got bad.
Extremely bad. The sources state explicitly, by late 2008, Tesla was nearly bankrupt. And they hammer home the timing again happening at the exact same time SpaceX was also on life support. Both companies circling the drain simultaneously.
Wow. So what did he do?
The sources vividly describe the personal risk he took. Facing the possible collapse of both his big dreams, he reportedly split his remaining personal fortune, whatever was left from PayPal, between the 2 companies, basically gambling everything he had.
Doubling down on both.
Totally. The material even includes this really poignant detail. He apparently had to borrow money just to pay his own rent at that point.
Man, that's putting it all on the line. So how did they both survive?
Well, SpaceX got the NASA contract, as we discussed, and Tesla. It got its own lifeline, detailed in the sources. In 2009, Tesla secured a crucial $465 million loan from the U.S. Department of Energy, part of a program to boost advanced vehicle tech.
Ah, the government loan. That was huge for them.
Absolutely critical. It let Tesla survive and develop its next car,
Oh.
the one the sources identify as the real game changer. For Tesla and for EVs generally. The Model S, launched in 2012, described as this sleek, high-performance electric sedan. And the sources just stated simply, it changed everything.
And it really did, didn't it? The Model S proved EVs didn't have to be like weird little golf carts. They could be cool, desirable, fast.
Exactly. Beautiful, amazing performance, good range. It completely shifted how people saw electric cars. It made them aspirational.
So with the success of the Model S and then the models that followed, the sources basically conclude this section saying, Musk had done it. He'd officially disrupted the massive, entrenched global auto industry. Electric cars were here to stay and desirable.
Okay, let's connect this back to how his focus seems to evolve according to the sources. Because by this point, he's disrupted space, he's disrupted energy and cars. But his ambition seems to expand again, towards something maybe even more fundamental, probing the edges of human potential itself.
Right. Which brings us to Neuralink.
Exactly. Neuralink. Founded in 2016, the sources describe it as a neurotechnology company. And the goal is incredibly ambitious, kind of sci-fi. Create a direct brain-machine interface.
A brain chip, basically. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, the sources detail these dual aims. One is definitely medical, using implants to treat really severe neurological conditions. Think paralysis from spinal cord injuries, maybe blindness, deafness, other brain disorders.
Okay, huge medical potential there if it works.
For sure. But then there's the other aim, the more speculative, futuristic one. Exploring ways to eventually merge human cognition with artificial intelligence.
Merge with AI. Okay, why? That sounds intense.
The sources give a crucial explanation for that why. According to the material, Musk strongly believes that AI, especially superintelligent AI, poses a genuine existential threat to humanity down the line.
Right, he talks about that a lot, the AI danger.
Exactly. And his stated reasoning, as presented in the sources, is basically the only way humans might be able to keep up, to avoid being left behind or even endangered by super AI, might be to enhance our own capabilities by integrating directly with it, through a brain interface. Kind of a, if you can't beat them, join them approach, but on a species level.
Wow, okay, that's heavy motivation. Did they show anything publicly?
They had their first big public demo in 2020. The sources mentioned this. It famously featured a pig named Gertrude with a Neuralink chip implanted.
Ah, yes, Gertrude the pig. I remember that.
The demo, as described, was meant to show the device reading Gertrude's neural activity in real time, visualizing the brain signals.
And more recently, have they moved beyond pigs?
Yes, significant milestone highlighted in the sources. In 2024, the company implanted a chip into a human subject for the first time, moving into human trials.
Okay, so it's progressing, but brain implants, that must raise some serious ethical questions.
Huge ones. The sources detail this clearly. The nature of this tech, directly interfacing with the brain, it brings up profound concerns. Questions like, who owns or controls your brain data? I mean, the most private data imaginable.
Yeah, that's scary.
And maybe even more unsettling. What happens if there's a glitch, a bug, a hack, in a device that's literally in your mind? The risks are immense.
It's definitely uncharted territory.
Totally. The sources summarize Neuralink's position well. It sits right at this complex crossroads. Groundbreaking medical potential, radical futurism about human enhancement, and just massive, unexplored moral and ethical hazards.
Okay, shifting gears again, but staying with these huge, ambitious projects. The sources detail another massive undertaking, this one leveraging SpaceX's core skills, Starlink, which is described as a major division within SpaceX itself.
Right. And Starlink's mission, as stated in the sources, is also incredibly ambitious. Bring fast internet to every corner of the planet. Global connectivity, basically, without relying on ground cables.
How are they doing that?
Through sheer numbers, really. The plan involves launching tens of thousands of these small, relatively cheap satellites into low Earth orbit, creating this huge interconnected mesh network that beams internet down everywhere.
Tens of thousands. Wow, how many are up there now?
The sources say, as of 2024, over 5,000 Starlink satellites are already in orbit, which is a pretty significant constellation already.
And is it reaching people?
Yeah, the reach is huge. Millions of users globally. The sources specifically mention its impact in places like remote villages that never had good internet before. And also, controversially, its use in war zones shows it can provide vital communication even in really tough situations.
So it's been seen as revolutionary in some ways, bringing internet to the unconnected.
Definitely hailed as revolutionary for that reason. But, predictably perhaps, the sources also detail the significant controversies swirling around it.
Like what?
Well, several things. Astronomers, for one, are not happy. They complain the sheer number of satellites creates light pollution, streaks across their images, interferes with ground-based observation, disrupts science. I can see that. What else?
Governments are worried. Concerns about a single private company controlling such a vital piece of global communication infrastructure. And critics, according to the sources, argue it gives Musk personally enormous geopolitical power and influence, with very little oversight.
Geopolitical power.
How so? The sources give this really specific, powerful example. In 2022, during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Starlink terminals were rushed in, used heavily by Ukrainian forces, helped them stay connected when their own networks were down or destroyed.
Right. That was widely reported.
And the sources analyzed the significance. It clearly showed how a private company's tech and the decisions of its owner about who gets access and under what terms could directly influence a major global conflict.
That's a really stark example of private power in geopolitics.
Absolutely. And it leads directly to this lingering question the sources pose, hanging over the whole project. Should one guy or one company really have that much control over global communications, effectively controlling the skies?
Which brings us, I guess, to the most recent and maybe the most chaotic of these big Musk undertakings.
Yeah.
Detailed in the sources, the whole Twitter acquisition saga, which then became X.
Oh boy. Yeah, where do we even start with that one?
Well, sources say the public bid started in 2022. The initial offer, $44 billion for Twitter.
And the sources characterize how that whole thing unfolded.
Yeah, they describe it as starting almost casually, like a joke, maybe, or just a whim. Then it suddenly got very serious. And from there, it reportedly just devolved into this completely chaotic saga, lawsuits flying back and forth, memes taking over the internet, tracking every twist, him trying to back out, then being forced back in. Just wild.
Total roller coaster. But in the end,
despite all the drama, the sources confirm he did buy it for the $44 billion.
And then did things calm down?
No, not exactly. The sources detail that almost immediately after he took control, everything at the company changed dramatically, rapidly.
What kind of changes?
Specific actions listed in the sources fired a huge chunk of the staff, like a massive percentage, including key leaders, crucial content moderation teams, then, controversially, reinstated a bunch of previously banned accounts, including figures kicked off for hate speech, misinformation.
Right, and the name change.
And the huge rebranding, getting rid of the iconic Twitter name, the bird logo, replacing it all with X. The sources connect this back to his long-held dream of an everything app, a single platform for communication, finance, everything, something he'd tried to build way back with X.com.
So what was his stated reason for buying Twitter and shaking everything up so drastically?
The sources present his rationale. He claimed it was all about free speech, protecting it, positioning himself as this champion against censorship he perceived on the platform.
But did everyone buy that?
Not according to the critics cited in the sources. They immediately contrasted his stated goals with their view, arguing it was much more about ego, about wanting personal control over this major global conversation platform, less about genuine free speech principles, especially as moderation seemed to loosen significantly. The sources present both sides here.
And what were the consequences of all these changes according to the material?
Significant consequences detailed. Advertisers got spooked, worried about the platform's direction, the rise in problematic content. Many reportedly fled, hitting revenue hard. The sources also state that data and user reports indicated a rise in hate speech, and generally, the platform just became way more unpredictable. And, as the sources phrase it, more Musk than ever.
So where does X stand now? Is it clear what happens next? Not really. The sources acknowledge the current state is very much uncertain. Will it survive, collapse, actually evolve into that everything app he wants? Still totally unclear, according to the material we have.
But the sources summarize the impact of that whole episode pretty powerfully. Regardless of X's ultimate fate, the saga showed just how much disruption, how much chaos one super wealthy, determined person can unleash on a really critical piece of the global public square. And they specifically add that phrasing, doing it all in the name of fixing things.
Right. So, okay, we've traced this massive arc From that difficult childhood, fueled by books and code, through building and losing control of those first companies, then launching these world-changing, almost impossible ventures in space and energy, connecting the globe with satellites, pushing into the human brain, and then this huge battle over the digital public square. The sources try to synthesize all this, right? Describing Musk as this figure of just immense complexity.
Yeah. He's portrayed as so many things at once in this material. A dreamer, definitely. A builder, relentlessly turning ideas into reality. A disruptor, overturning entire industries. But interestingly, the sources also use the word manipulator, suggesting maybe a darker side to how he operates. It's definitely not a simple picture.
And they highlight those conflicting aspects, don't they? He talks about saving humanity, going multiplanetary, surviving AI, these huge altruistic-sounding goals. But then, consistently, through all these ventures, you see this intense drive to gain and keep personal control over the systems that define modern life transport, communication, maybe even thought itself.
And based on all the ventures we've dug into from the sources, they paint this picture of the future he seems to be building. It's a world where, cars drive themselves, rockets are colonizing planets, maybe brains are linked to machines, and crucially, one man him increasingly owns and controls the networks, the platforms, the infrastructure, maybe even the code itself.
Which brings the sources right to that core question, the one that kind of sums up the whole complex picture, the implications of his power. So they ask, is Elon Musk basically a visionary building a better future? Or is he becoming a kind of tyrant, accumulating way too much unchecked power? Is he a savior? Or is he building a system that's mostly just about him?
And then the sources suggest maybe there's an even deeper question, shifting the focus away from him and back onto us, the public, society. Everyone who's watched this meteoric rise with, fascination, maybe admiration, maybe fear.
Yeah, that final thought the sources leave us with, it's really provocative, something to chew on. In our collective hunger, maybe even desperation for progress, for big solutions to big problems, did we, maybe without realizing it, kind of crown a king?
We have covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
Traced this truly remarkable, incredibly detailed story, following the path laid out in these sources, right from those childhood experiences all the way through these massive, often controversial ventures.
Yeah, from surviving bullying and escaping into books, to the sheer grind and frustration of building those first companies, getting pushed out, then launching rockets and EVs against just unbelievable odds and near bankruptcy, connecting the planet with Starlink, delving into the brain with Neuralink, and then that whole chaotic fight for the future of public discourse with Twitter X. I mean, every piece of this story, the sources detail, just reveals more layers. Ambition, resilience, sure, but also conflict, chaos, and huge consequences.
And as these sources really challenge us to think about, it's the sheer scale of it all, right? The interconnectedness of his companies, the level of personal control he seems to wield across so many critical areas. It just forces you to look beyond easy labels. Is he good? Is he bad? It's way more complicated than that.
It brings us right back to that final, really powerful question the material raises. Not just about him, but about us. About society, progress, and the kind of power we grant to individuals.
In our drive for innovation, for the future. Did we maybe put too much faith, too much power in one person's hands? Did we effectively crown a king? That's the big question this material leaves you, the listener, to really grapple with.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the incredibly dense, complex, and fascinating story of Elon Musk, as presented in these sources. We hope it's given you a lot of valuable insights, details, and maybe some tough questions to consider further.